Time for the next chapter. This is chapter 4. It's called By Daylight. Now, this might be back to front, but you can still see the picture. There you go. See, By Daylight. So, the next morning when Tom woke, he could not think why he felt so happy until he remembered the garden. The appearances in the hall seemed less likely than ever, but the impression on his mind of what he had seen through the garden door remained unchanged. Yet now he began to think that visiting that garden would be less easy than he had reckoned last night. His aunt and uncle would certainly do all they could to stop him. They did not want him to use the garden, else why had they kept him in the dark about its very existence? That made Tom remember his anger against them, and he determined to shame them. He would have to play a very careful game. By innocent-seeming references he must hit home, without ever letting them suspect that he knew of the garden and intended to go there. He began at breakfast. "Do you believe that lying is wrong?" "Oh, Tom," cried Aunt Gwen, "always!" "I mean," said Tom, "do you think that some special lies might be right, sometimes?" "Is lying ever justifiable?" This was the kind of question Uncle Allen liked to discuss. He folded away his paper and cleared his throat. "I suppose, Tom, you are thinking of what are commonly known as white lies." "I don't think so exactly," said Tom. "At least, I mean, well, someone being kept in the dark about something he'd enjoy because some other people didn't want to tell him about it. I mean, supposing the other people went so far as to say the thing just wasn't there, so in order not to have to bother the first person using it." Aunt Gwen looked confused. What kind of thing was it the second people didn't want the first people to know about and use? "First person, not first people," said Tom. "And the thing was, well, a hot water bottle, say?" suggested Aunt Gwen. "No," said Tom, "more like—" he tried to think of something between a hot water bottle and a large garden. "More like a couch, say, a large outdoor couch." "I'm not sure that I've ever heard of such a thing," said Aunt Gwen. "A large outdoor couch?" "It doesn't really matter what the thing is, Gwen," said Uncle Allen impatiently. "If I understand Tom, the point is that some person or persons were lying simply for their own convenience and to the harm of another person or persons. Is that so, Tom?" "Yes," said Tom. "I just wondered if you thought that kind of lie might be right. I just wondered." "Of all possible forms of lying," said Uncle Allen, "that is surely the least justifiable. Indeed, it is utterly and obviously unjustifiable." He looked severely at Tom. "I am surprised, Tom, that you should have any doubts about it." He gathered his newspaper and post together and went off to work. "Never mind, Tom," said Aunt Gwen. "Uncle Allen has a very highly developed sense of right and wrong. He says so himself. You will have one too, I'm sure, when you grow up." "I have one now," said Tom indignantly. "It's other people who haven't." Tom had not intended to harry Aunt Gwen, apart from Uncle Allen. That had seemed unsportsmanlike. Generous resolutions, however, often break down under the strain of nothing more serious than annoyance, and Tom was now very much annoyed. He had been made to feel in the wrong when he was in the right, and the people who had made him feel that were themselves the wrongdoers. Tom helped to clear the breakfast table and followed his aunt to the sink. He began to dry up, darkly intent. "Aunt Gwen?" "Yes, Tom?" "It was kind of you to put flowers in my bedroom when I came." "Tom dear, I didn't know you'd noticed them." "Had you to buy them?" "Yes, but you mustn't bother about that." "It would have been easier for you if you'd been able to get flowers from a garden of your own." "Yes, but there isn't a garden to this house, of course." "No? What do you mean by no, Tom?" "I meant, what a pity. Wouldn't it be nice if there were a garden at the back of the house, with a lawn and trees and flowers and even a greenhouse? It would be nice, too, if we had wings and could fly, Tom. Well, suppose you could walk out of the door at the back this very minute, Aunt Gwen, this very minute, and walk onto a lawn and cut hyacinths from the flower beds on that lawn, from little corner beds shaped like the quarters of an orange. What would you say, Aunt Gwen? What do you say now?" He as good as told her that he knew all about the garden. He had challenged her openly. Aunt Gwen did not start or show shame. She laughed. "Well, to begin with, Tom, I should be very surprised indeed if you picked me a hyacinth from anywhere outside now." "Oh? Well, hyacinths don't flower even out of doors at this time of year. It's too late in the summer. See what your romancing has led you into. But I've seen hyacinths flowering out of doors at just this time of year," said Tom. He stammered a bit because he was frightened. "No, Tom, you can't have. They're quite over." Tom put down the plate he had been drying. It was still damp, and the tea-cloth. "I'm going downstairs, if you don't mind." "What for, Tom?" "Oh, nothing special. I won't do anything wrong." "Don't go this morning. This is the morning that Mrs. Bartholomew always goes downstairs to wind the grandfather clock." His aunt's warning only sped Tom. He told himself that she was inventing an excuse to keep him from the garden. He was still afraid all the same, and not of Mrs. Bartholomew. As he ran down the stairs to the hall, Tom was remembering the hyacinths. He had seen the curling back of the petals. He had smelt them. They had been real last night. They were real now. He had only to open the garden door to see them again, to see the whole of his garden again. He reached the garden door and turned its handle, but the door was fastened. He found the bolts as he had done last night, but it was already drawn, and the bolt had a granular roughness to the touch that he recognised as rust, more rust than could have been formed in one night. Tom tried to move the bolt in its socket, but it was rusted up completely. It had been rusted up, one could tell, for years. The door was fastened now by an ordinary modern Yale lock. Tom turned its little knob, but hesitated to open the door. He felt a sickness in his stomach, as though he had eaten the wrong things at breakfast. Perhaps he ought to go straight back upstairs to bed. Besides, his head was swimming a little, and he felt a chill over his skin. Suddenly he cried aloud, angrily, "Don't be a fool! It's there, I tell you! The garden's there!" He flung the door wide and blinked into the morning sunlight. At the back of the house was a narrow paved space enclosed by a wooden fence, with a gateway onto the side road at one end. There were 5 dustbins, and near the dustbins was parked an old car from beneath which stuck a pair of legs in trousers. A piece of newspaper bowled about, blown in from outside and imprisoned here, and the place smelt of sun on stone and metal and the creosote of the fencing. The man under the car crawled out at the sound of the door's opening. He had a short ginger beard. Otherwise there was nothing whatsoever of interest about him. "Hello," he said. "Who are you?" Tom didn't answer. "Oh, I know. You're the boy from the first floor front, the Gitsons. A bit dull for you here, isn't it?" "Yes," said Tom. "Do you live in the ground floor back flat?" "Yes," said Gingerbeard. He looked at Tom curiously. The boy's voice sounded strange. "Do you have a maid that lights your fire for you?" "Oh, what? And you don't have a garden either?" To Gingerbeard's amazement, the boy on the doorstep, without waiting for an answer to his last question, burst into tears. "Here, I say, what on earth's the matter?" "Leave me alone." Tom turned to stumble indoors again. Wait a minute." There was something imperative in the man's voice. "Listen." Tom halted and held back his desolate crying. "I thought so," said the man softly. In the quiet they could hear from indoors the ticking of the grandfather clock and the sound of someone shuffling down the stairs. "It's old Ma Bartholomew," whispered Gingerbeard, "coming to wind up her precious clock. You don't want to run into her. There've never been children here, and she might not like it." Tom drew back out of sight into the doorway. His arm was still up to his face to hide the tears, but his eyes now looked over the top. The shuffling steps came nearer. The figure of Mrs. Bartholomew appeared. She was old, small, and bowed. She was dressed all in black. When she reached the clock, Mrs. Bartholomew took from her purse a key and opened the door of the pendulum case with it. She reached inside the case and brought out something small and polished that looked like the starting handle of some tiny car. She reached up inside the case again and must have pressed a lever that latched the glass front of the clock dial. The front swung open at her touch. She took what had looked like a miniature starting handle and fitted it into a slot on the right-hand side of the dial, and turned it. As she wound, there was a gentle whirring sound. Then she wound on the other side of the dial. Finally, she latched the dial front again, put the winding key back inside the pendulum case, locked the case door, and shuffled away with the key. Her footsteps climbed the stairs and died away. While he was watching the clock being wound, Tom had had time to calm himself. He began to reason about the garden. It was true that there was no garden this morning, but there certainly had been last night, hyacinths and all. He turned back to look again at what was outside, searching for some link between last night and this morning. Up to the fence of the backyard ran strips of garden that belonged to the pink brick semi-detached houses beyond. In one of the garden strips stood an old yew tree. Once, certainly, the tree had been clipped to a shape. Tom stared at it with a kind of hope. "What's bitten you now?" said the man. "Nothing," said Tom. "Thank you for warning me about Mrs. Bartholomew. Goodbye." He went slowly down the hall, thinking. The tree was perhaps a link, but it was out of his reach in another garden. The big house itself was a link, of course, but it would tell him nothing. He had already taken the turn to the stairway when the voice of the grandfather clock behind him reminded him. The clock was a link. He went back to the grandfather clock and studied it intensely. The clock case was plain. The dial bore only 12 numbers after all, but it was decorated with a design that now struck Tom as peculiar and interesting. In a semicircular arch above the dial itself stood a creature like a man, but with enormous sweeping wings. His body was wound about with something white. His face was a round of gold, and his feet were of the same colour and were planted on either side of the clock dial. One foot seemed to stand on a piece of grassy land. The other went into the sea. Tom saw painted fishes that swam around the creature's foot, and seaweed. In one hand he held a book, open towards himself. If Tom had been able to look over that winged shoulder, what might he have read in that book? What the clock told him, Tom could not yet understand, and his mind turned away from it. He was back at thinking of the yew tree he had seen over the yard fence. That fence looked easy to climb, Tom said to himself. During the rest of the day, Tom matured his plan. He also wrote to Peter, the first of an important series of reports. He told Peter, as well as he was able, what had happened last night. He told him of his intentions tonight. He meant to climb into the next-door garden and examine the yew tree there, because surely it was one of the trees that he had seen in the garden. He would go all around it. He would climb it. He would search it for any clue. When he had finished his letter, Tom wrote across the top the initials B.A.R. They stood for Burn After Reading. All Tom's letters to Peter from now on bore that direction. Only the picture postcard of Ely Tower was without it, and only that was not destroyed. That evening Tom went to bed as usual, and kept deliberate watch. His aunt and uncle seemed so slow in going to bed and to sleep. Twice Tom dozed, woke with a start, and went to his bedroom door and looked out, and there was still a light from under the door of the other bedroom. The third time it had gone. And after the shortest wait that prudence required, Tom crept out and downstairs as before to the hall. As he went along it, the grandfather clock began striking for what must be midnight. I hope the moon's well up outside, Tom thought. I shall need light for getting across the yard. It would be awkward to make a noise out there, falling over dustbins or the car or anything. The grandfather clock had reached the 13th stroke as he slid his fingers up to the edge of the door to find the knob of the Yale lock. He could not find it. He felt again. There was no Yale lock. He did not understand, but he tried the bolt. It had been shot home. That was how the door was fastened now. Now he knew. He knew. With trembling fingers he began to ease the bolt back into a well-oiled, rustless socket. The grandfather clock was striking on and on. Upstairs, Alan Kitson, wakened by it, humped his shoulders fretfully. It's midnight. What on earth does the clock think it's striking? His wife did not answer. Striking hours and hours that don't exist. I only hope it's keeping Mrs. Bartholomew awake too. But Alan Kitson would have been disappointed if he had seen Mrs. Bartholomew. She was lying tranquilly in bed. Her false teeth in a glass of water by the bedside grinned unpleasantly in the moonlight, but her indrawn mouth was curved in a smile of easy, sweet, dreaming sleep. She was dreaming of the scenes of her childhood. And the grandfather clock still went on striking, as if it had lost all count of time, and, while it struck, Tom, with joy in his heart, drew the bolt, turned the door handle, opened the door, and walked out into his garden that he knew was waiting for him. And the next chapter is called The Footprints in the Dew. I'm going to put my bookmark in. I think Kate made it, my big Kate. I think it's supposed to be a diplodocus. Not sure. You'll have to let me know if you think of something different. Anyway, see you next time for the next chapter.